the trend of improvement between the second quarter and the third quarter clearly shows that this recession will be short-lived.
Senate summons communications minister over insecurity in the country.
We have passed in the last Senate and in this Senate as well on how the communications subsector would aid in the fight against the insecurity that we have been facing.
House of Representatives approves a fund of 148 billion naira to 5 states for the execution of federal projects.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall discuss COVID-19 vaccine access for Nigeria.
Now, the push for a vaccine for coronavirus more than ever before is gaining attention, especially with global infections from COVID-19 soaring past 60 million cases with more than 1.4 million deaths.
Now, for countries heavily impacted by the virus, it is indeed a race against time for a remedy, and recent developments are showing hope on the horizon with the successful trials of vaccines being reported.
Now, recently, the breakthroughs sufficed when American pharmaceutical giant Pfizer and its German partner BioNTech announced a 90% efficacy vaccine in an ongoing phase 3 trials involving more than 40,000 people with no safety concerns raised. Incidentally, Nigeria's Dr. Onyema Obuago is part of this team of researchers.
That's quite commendable, notable, and according to reports, the vaccine developed by Pfizer is to be given in 2 doses with a 3-week interval. But the vaccine is supposed to be stored in deep freezer conditions, which experts say could complicate supply chain logistics, particularly for less developed countries.
And quite true, Kingsley. Similarly, U.S. biotech firm Moderna revealed its experimental vaccine against COVID-19 at 94.5% success rate, with more than 30,000 participants, marking a second major breakthrough in the vaccine hunt. It also announced that its vaccine can remain stable at standard refrigerated temperatures of 2 degrees Celsius to 8 degrees Celsius for 30 days.
That's right, Nada, but we also know that there's a vaccine developed by the University of Oxford and another, of course, also by the Russians, plus the Chinese. But studies have revealed that developing nations, including Nigeria, might not have immediate access to the COVID-19 vaccine due to inaccessibility or poor storage capacity. Now, one of the things to note, of course, is that there's a great deal of nationalism already surrounding advanced purchases of the vaccines. Earlier this month, Nigeria's Vice President Yemi Osinbajo, during the opening of the virtual edition of the Paris Peace Forum, stated that one of Nigeria's top priorities is to get the COVID-19 vaccine. But how?
Well, critical is as that may be especially with the possibility of a second wave of coronavirus. Many are worried that Nigeria might be in the bottom ladder of getting a vaccine soon, even in the midst of assurances from the federal government. But in the face of all this, what do we do as a nation in accessing this vaccine? When can it be made available? And what further efforts can be put in the local production of a vaccine in the interim? This and more we shall attempt this morning with our guests on the program. Good morning, Nigeria. I am Yusuf Nadabo Suma. You're welcome.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague Nadabo in also welcoming you to this edition of the program. As usual, we're broadcasting live on the network service of Africa's largest television network, the Nigerian Television Authority. And we're here in our Abuja headquarters studios. In the course of the program, we have our regular complimentary segments, including newspaper review and business. But first, let's listen in to Chimobi Watonaji as he gives us the highlights of the morning news. Good morning, Chimobi.
Hello, good morning, Kingsley and Yusuf. Here is the morning news.
The Federal Executive Council is reassuring Nigerians that the current economic recession bedeviling the country will be short-lived. The Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, stated this while briefing journalists after the meeting of the council presided over by President Muhammadu Buhari.
This third quarter report, though a contraction, is much better than we expected. It's also much better than was projected by the IMF and the World Bank. This COVID-19 recession follows a pattern across the world today. The trend of improvement between the second quarter and the third quarter clearly shows that this recession will be short-lived, and it indicates that we could actually exit recession in the fourth quarter.
Government is working towards reversing the declining economic trend that caused Nigeria to enter into recession. Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning Zainab Ahmed, at the close of the 2020 Nigerian Economic Summit, said the COVID-19 induced recession has brought to the fore the need for an all-inclusive approach to bring economic growth at par with population increase.
We need to set up a thinking group of youths from the ward level to the local government level, to the state level, and to the national level.
Including our youth in the processes as solution finders because of their skills, their innovative minds. We also try to make the shift from empowerment to investment. Always see a way to blend it.
About 40 billion naira has been approved by the Federal Executive Council for the maintenance of roads as well as the control of soil erosion, flood and pollution across the country. Now, the road maintenance drive in particular to be undertaken by FEMA is in furtherance of the implementation of the Economic Sustainability Program.
These are late third quarter, early fourth quarter interventions to respond to the COVID impact of the economy. And this will tell you some of the things the Minister of Finance was saying, that the Economic Sustainability Plan implementation is what will take us out of recession.
And now to the National Assembly, where infrastructure development across the 36 states and the FCT is among the top on the list of federal government priorities to enhance socio-economic activities. This is why the House of Representatives gave the go-ahead for the settlement of claims and liabilities incurred by states in the execution of federal projects.
Governors taking benefit from the coffers of the government in the center here must make it known to their constituents in the state that this is a reimbursement from the central government to the sub-nationals.
The refund is going to be made through the issuance of promissory notes and bonds.
In the meantime, the global trend in war against insecurity, especially terrorism, is the adoption of multifaceted tactics, implying that while soldiers and other security personnel are in the trenches, communication experts should be on the airwaves intercepting and disseminating information relating to crime. But at the moment, this seems far from Nigeria's war against terrorism. This is why the Senate has resolved to meet with the Minister of Communications and Digital Economy to ensure immediate and full involvement of communications technology in tackling insecurity.
Over communication facility, this inability of our security apparatus and service providers to effectively manage this all-important sector. Bandits, terrorists negotiate for ransom using telephones.
Ensure that he implements those provisions or those resolutions.
New COVID-19 update of cases reveal 198 new infections announced by the Nigeria Center for Disease Control. Now, this increases the number of cases to 66,805. Of the 198 new cases reported from 13 states, FCT has 53, Lagos 48, Ogun recorded 40, Akwa Ibom with 20, Bauchi 9, Plateau 8, Kaduna has 5, Kano 4, Benue, Jigawa and Nasarawa have 3 cases each, while Edo and Kwara recorded 1 case each. Now, 62,493 cases have been treated and discharged, and an unfortunate 1,169 deaths on record in 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory. That's the morning news. The program continues with Kingsley and Yusuf. Many thanks for staying with us.
A scorecard like no other. Government has put in place measures and initiatives principally targeted at youths, women, and the most vulnerable groups in our society. These included broad plan to lift 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in the next 10 years. The creation of 75 billion naira National Youth Investment Fund to provide opportunities for the youths, and the Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises Survivor Fund, through which government is A. Paying 3-month salaries of the staff of 100,000 micro, small and medium enterprises. B. Paying for the registration of 250,000 businesses at the Corporate Affairs Commission. C. Giving a grant of 30,000 naira to 100,000 artisans and guaranteeing market for the product of traders. These are in addition to many other initiatives such as farmer money, trader money, market money, N-Power, N-Tech, and N-Agro. These and more in spite of a recession and a global pandemic.
Do you know that social media is not good or bad, and that it is you who is using it that is either good or bad? Bad social media users spread rumors and fake news without verification. But good social media users stop, verify the information, and reflect before sharing it. Now, are you a good social media user? Stop the spread of fake news. Verify the authenticity of your source for a better Nigeria.
This message is from the National Orientation Agency. The Council of Our Fathers.
My advice to these young people is please do not take us back to those harrowing days. You probably do not know what it is.
Nigerian youths, let's build our nation together.
Liverpool are unstoppable at home, but will they carry that form on the road against the Seagulls of Brighton? This Saturday, it's Brighton versus Liverpool on the Premier League Live, showing on the NTA network from 1 p.m.
The Premier League Live is brought to you by Access Bank, Babai Jebu, Lipton Tea, and Close Up.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you from the Nigerian Television Authority, the NTA. We now get started with the businesses, but better you know that today we're discussing COVID-19 vaccine access for Nigerians. Stakeholders in Nigeria's transport sector identify efficient transportation system as a key element that will guarantee the competitiveness of Nigerians in the African continental free trade area market. Let's now join Kulade for details.
Transport experts at a workshop in Abuja described Nigeria's transport sector as a hub for Africa, which will be instrumental to the takeoff of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Minister of State for Industry, Trade and Investment, Miriam Katagum, observed that Nigeria must maximize the opportunities in the AFCFTA market for economic growth and job creation, adding that local content promotion across every segment of the logistics value chain should be explored, starting with opportunities in patronizing Nigeria's locally manufactured automobiles and parts, increasing fleet of ownership, especially in the maritime space, and growing local share of logistics and transit-related services. For the Minister of Aviation, Hadi Sirika, beyond preparations for the start of the trade under AFCFTA in January 2021, Nigeria is investing massively in the aviation sector in order to increase connectivity, while the Minister of Works and Housing, Babatunde Raji Fashola, said roads connecting Nigeria to the rest of the continent are currently being worked on as Nigeria seeks to increase her interconnectivity across Africa. And quickly to the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange to see how tradings went on Wednesday, November 25, 2020. With business news, I'm Kunle Adeyeye.
Many thanks, Kunle Adeyeye, for the business package. Coming up next is newspaper review.
Well, Bayo Atebi is already in the house here. We're talking the newspaper this morning. You're welcome, Bayo.
Thank you, Yusuf. Good morning. Good morning, Kinsley. Good morning, Nigeria.
Right, Bayo, good to see you.
Kinsley, can we get started?
Yes. Let's take a look at the Daily Trust newspaper. We have 3 papers this morning. Daily Trust is one of them. And below the nameplate says how Nigeria will exit recession. And that story is attributed to the Minister of Finance. Farmers say a chicken may sell for 10,000 naira during Yuletide. That's page 26. And actually, it's just about a month to Christmas. I served Nigeria with fear of God. That's attributed to Gawan, Nigeria's military head of state, 1966 to 75. Details on page 7. Now, farmers kick as federal government moves to reopen borders with 2 riders. Abuja and Lagos Chambers of Commerce back government. Food prices will drop. That's according to what the experts are saying. Now, you have photographs on the front page there, but those photographs relate also to the headline below it. And it says, Maradona, one of football's greatest, dies at 60. Now, the photographs there show a police van carrying his dead body from the gated community where he died in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And then you see mourners outside there as he was taken out of the community. Maradona dead at 60. Kakovic spends 43 billion naira on interventions and to rebuild 44 police stations. That's page 18. IPOB leader Kanu's trial begins today. Contractor blocks Apapa Port Terminal, demolishes exit gate. Adabo.
Okay, the Nation newspaper is right here with me, so let's see what it has in stock for Nigerians today. On page 3 at the top mast is court orders Shorty to produce minor son. Lawyer quits case, that is. You get the details of that on page 3. And Senator Dams PDP for APC to run for governor, still on page 3. And Buni boasts on defections. Ganduje spends 1.8 billion naira on abandoned students. Details on page 6. Bagudu 6 assemblies nod for 141 billion naira budget. Still get that one on page 8. Below the masthead, we have a story on Naira continues downward slide on page 26 as fire guides Otupo main market on page 6. Now, business leaders to empower 4 million youths with 175 billion naira. The writer goes, the search for 4 destroyed police stations are rather for rebuilding, and that's going to be on page 5. The big story here on the Nation newspaper is a pressure mounts on government to reopen land borders. And the writers are LCCI, NECA, TUC push for action, and the panel's report ready, says Finance Minister. And JP Clark has been honored in Lagos. You get the details of that on page 8. The story on the soccer legend Diego Maradona is also here with the big picture, and Soccer World mourns Maradona. And finally, on the Nation newspaper, wife, son of Atiku's security aide abducted. You get the details on page 4.
And then Federal Executive Council okays 39.771 billion naira for road erosion, for road that is, and then erosion really. The details of that is going to be on page 8. Bayo?
Thank you. Let's start with the issue about border closure. It may be recalled that in August last year, Nigerian border was closed based on concerns about proliferation of small arms, importation of drugs, as well as smuggling of agricultural produce. The Honorable Minister for Finance, Budget and National Planning, while addressing Nigeria Economic Summit, dropped the hint that the border could be opened soon. Yesterday, she confirmed that she is a co-chair of the committee set up by the federal government, and they will soon submit a report to the federal government. However, she also talked about the recession that Nigeria slipped in at the end of the second quarter. She says the ESP, the government had anticipated the recession, and therefore the ESP is in track to pull Nigeria out of the recession in a very quick time. He says that the plans were to retrieve and rework there are no plans to retrieve or rework the 2021 budget, because plans were already afoot to ensure that the impending recession coming from the pandemic around the world was already factored in. However, she says there are issues that concern about salaries. He says November salaries have been paid, and those of December will also be paid. The issues are concerning agencies whose salary funding through gimmicks had been exhausted, but there are plans afoot to make sure that they are properly funded. She said from the reliance of the ERPG and the ESP, there are indications that by the end of earliest end of 2020 or latest beginning of 2021, Nigeria will pull out of the recession. CACOVID is the coalition against COVID-19, and they say they have plans to invest about 150 billion to implement youth development programs. This is to support federal government job creation initiative. The coalition says that the development program will provide technological and vocational education to over 4 million Nigerian youths in 5 years. CACOVID plans to spend another 100 billion naira in the next 2 years to renovate, acquire, refurbish, and equipment for police, so as to focus. Their focus will be on the 44 police stations that were destroyed around the country. This was revealed by the co-chair of the CACOVID, that is the governor of the central bank, during a briefing in Lagos yesterday. He observed that unemployment among the youth was a very critical factor behind the recent unrest that gripped the country. He says 25 billion is to be domiciled in the fund to support entrepreneurship that will follow pursuit aimed at providing employment skills, not just share rat education for our youths. There are indications that the INEC chairman will emerge from the Senate confirmation next week. This followed the request by President Muhammadu Buhari seeking the Senate to confirm Professor Mahmoud Yakubu for a second term. Reading the letter that the President had read yesterday, the Senate referred it to the INEC committee headed by Senator Kabir Gaya. They are to report to plenary next week.
All right, Bayo, I think there are at least 2 or 3 stories that, Tadabo, I think we can discuss before our time is up. One, of course, is the death of Maradona, as a soccer legend. But there's also one that we may wish to take very quickly, and that's General Gawan saying, accept Nigeria with fear of God. I'm sure you have all seen the story. The story is in greater detail on page 7, while there was a debate in the UK House of Parliament. A member of the British Parliament, this was the debate on the British reaction, or the parliamentary reaction to the Nigerian government handling of the NSAS protest. A member of Parliament said that Nigeria's problems were usually the result of corruption and a litany of other issues. And he claimed on the floor of the House that Nigerian leaders, of course, usually raid the treasury and cut away the funds. And he specifically mentioned General Yakubu Gowon as having allegedly, in his obviously ignorant view, taken half of the money with central bank while he was in office. General Gowon was Nigeria's head of state, 1966 to 1975. Now, General Gowon has responded here, and part of what he said is to describe it as, in his words, a rubbish fallacy.
Well, you see, parliamentarians have what is called absolute privilege. They are free to say what they can within the chambers of parliament. But this is completely falsehood. And people at the peak of excitement when they are talking to their peers in the parliament sometimes raise a lot of issues that are not factually based. And so I think it deserves to be ignored. But be that as it may, the same British Parliament had a petition signed by 200,000 Nigerians electronically seeking sanctions against Nigeria. And what has been the reaction? The petition was based on the signatories of 200 youths, and the government of United Kingdom says it will not speculate on future sanctions about Nigeria. The debate was led by Theresa Vilas, who represents Chipping and Barnet. They say that the British government says it is concerned about violence during recent protests and will await the outcome of Nigeria's investigation into reports of the police brutality. Sanctions, as they were demanded, they said public speculation about future sanctions as to impose Nigeria could reduce the impact of their designation because they have to wait for the facts before they are. Our own Foreign Affairs Minister, Geoffrey Enyoma, yesterday also said parliamentarians are free to express their views because the parliament is a place for freedom of expression. But when it comes to sanction, it is not the parliament that imposes sanction. It is the government. And before the government acts, they will have to hear their own side. And Nigeria has forwarded its own side of the version.
But naturally, that's why it starts, Kingsley, from the parliament to the government, and it becomes real. I find it very difficult sometimes to, stomach how this, parliamentarians outside Nigeria, British, US, and the rest of them tend to mingle rather in other nations, activities so much, and pointing fingers at our leaders and saying they've done this. I mean, what Gowon is saying is the truth. It's a fallacy, really.
Looking back at 70s, we should take it as a national insult, notwithstanding the issue of privilege. The British member of parliament who made that false allegation, without substance anyway, ought to be educated. I don't know how old he is. But General Gowon was overthrown July 29th, 1975.
Yes,
while he was attending the OAU summit in Kampala, Uganda. Yeah. And General Gowon, of course, there was a video of him being informed by anxious aides as to what was happening back home. He had no knowledge that the coup was going to take place. In fact, Colonel Jogaba, as he was at the time, was the commander of the Brigade of Guards, saw him off at the Lagos airport en route Kampala. And then the next thing was the coup broadcast that he had been overthrown. Now, where was he going to go to? Well, a number of African brother leaders who were with him at the conference or at the summit now said, look, they will offer him asylum. First, I think Iyadema of Togo, with whom we had very charming relationships. And then from there, he moved on to the UK. He was in London. And you recall that while he was in London, he then decided to enroll as a student at Warwick University. And one of the photographs, I remember seeing that photograph, that was published at the time, was of General Gowon with his tray on the queue at the cafeteria.
Yes.
And basically, he went to the UK basically to just study that.
Absolutely.
Not to go and really
he went there to join his family. And I mean, okay, even after all of that, General Gowon, go and ask, how many oil blocks does he have? I mean, has General Gowon displayed any sense of affluence that you would say, okay, this is what he sorted away while he was in office? So this is part of what we see, because I saw some of the posts in the social media of some young persons who were getting excited to say, look, here what is coming from Britain, they should have information. If he took half of Nigeria's CBN's money to wherever he took it, why did you not return the money to Nigeria?
No, it's even simple. If he has stolen that much money, why will he, as a student, be pitied by the then head of state, General Murtala Mohammed, yes, who ordered for his restitution and his school fees to be paid while he was a student?
Precisely.
If he had money stuck in the United Kingdom, Why would that happen? Anyway, some of these issues should be ignored because that is one of the dangers of social media. A lot of false information get across on the social media.
No, this is not social media. No, this is a contemporaneous report of, shall we say, an uninformed member of the British Parliament making an unfounded allegation against the former Nigerian head of state.
It's part of what I'm saying, unfounded allegation.
This whole situation, when you look at it very well, all right, my worry is about the stereotype there.
Absolutely.
And how, you know, our youths are trying to buy into this.
Absolutely.
Okay, the education needs to go further than that so that the youth should know that nation, I mean, Nigeria is our country and we should protect it at all costs. And of course, foreign infrastructure shouldn't come into this.
Rwanda is on air to have said that most nations of the world tend to talk down Africa about human rights and about corruption. They point one finger, forgetting that sometimes the four fingers point at them. Most of the instances where they are looting in Africa, where does the looted funds find their way to? They are usually in those subcontinents. Well, Diego Maradona has passed on.
Has passed on, yeah, sure.
Yes. And he, incidentally, 2 weeks ago, was operated upon for a clot he had on his brain. Unfortunately, 2 days ago, he suffered cardiac arrest and he didn't pull out of it. But he has been described as a legend. The Chelsea Football Club in England, in a tribute, said he's a genius of the art, a master of our game, and one of all-time great. And one of the times where he established his one all-time great was the 1986 World Cup in Mexico, where he scored a goal while trying to head the ball, and Peter Shilton was trying to punch the ball away. He supported himself with the hand, and when he was asked later, he said it was the hand of God. But Diego Maradona, later on, moved with a 50-yard ball, dribbled 4 English players and the goalkeeper, and he scored a goal that is one of the best in the record of World Cup history. But unfortunately, when he retired from football in 1977, he attempted at coaching. 1997. He attempted his hands at coaching. He coached Argentina, United Arab Emirates, Mexico, but he didn't make a success of it. But unfortunately, he had a challenge with drugs, and that affected his life considerably. Not many people know.
Poor weight management.
One of his daughters is the wife of Manchester City striker, Aguero.
Yeah. What's his first name? Aguero. Sometimes you just get confused by their first name. His first name escapes me now.
Yes.
That's great. Diego Maradona, may his soul rest in peace. You know, he was on the pitch against Nigeria at the 1994 World Cup in the US.
Yes.
When Samson Siasia opened scoring for Nigeria. And then, of course, Maradona and his colleagues came out, equalized, and unfortunately we lost that match 2-1. I think we've played against Argentina in 3 different World Cups or so. Yeah, but Maradona left that World Cup 1994 in apparent disgrace because he failed a drug test, in the course of that. But Maradona, immensely talented, and unfortunately now dead at 60.
Outing, I believe.
Yeah, there's a story here. I don't know whether you've heard this story. I just want to use it as part of what the headline here says. Farmers say a chicken may sell for 10,000 naira during Yuletide. The details are inside. But I'm sure you know that the price of onions has gone through the roof.
Yes.
Seriously.
Onions.
Seriously. Seriously, a basket of it costs more than 4,000 now. That used to sell at 1,500.
Just a small bulb, a small bulb. 2 bulbs, they're telling you 100 naira. Sometimes they will say, no, one is 100.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Depending on the size.
Jega is the marketing capital of onions in Nigeria. That's in Kebbi State. So Kebbi State governor and all others who are concerned with onions, what is happening? Why are we not seeing onions? If you add the price of onions to chicken and whatever else and turkey that will become it, then how are we going to be celebrating
the Yuletide? 2 reasons there, really. The flood really affected the production of onion, cultivation of onion, really, and of course insecurity, especially in the western parts of, northwestern part of Nigeria.
Yes.
So these 2 factors really affected the production, really.
Farmers are not able to go deep into the farm to farm the onions because banditry has been a big challenge.
And then racketeering.
Yes, unfortunately also the last flood dealt serious devastation to crops that were just growing and being ready for harvest.
Yeah, but it couldn't possibly be that it's only in one section of the country that we cultivate onions. Don't you have onions in Adamawa?
That's the major part.
It's the major part.
Affects it really. Especially we here in Abuja, we find our supplies from that area.
From that area.
Yeah, many thanks, Bayo. Thank you so much.
And onions, of course, are very healthy as part of our diet.
Yes.
They are really.
Very healthy. So, but it's hard to go with chicken and
without onions?
Sorry, Bayo?
What meal will you have without onions?
You can have your breakfast without onions. If you have bread and then you have a spread of peanut butter on it.
Well, if they're so concerned about the chicken thing so much, you need to try this fast
if you add slices of onion with your breakfast, you will have
breakfast. You could boil your egg without having it either solid side
up. Bayo, many thanks for coming this morning. We thank you so much. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria. We're reaching you from the NTA. We shall now take a break. Our conversation continues in a moment. Stay with us.
The counsel of our fathers.
I will urge and advise our younger generation to use talent and brain to sort out problems, not arms.
Nigerian youths, let's build our nation together.
Hello, madam. Would you like to join us on this mission?
Yes, but how?
Just one question for you. How do you keep your toilet clean?
I use regular detergent and bleach for washing and removing yellow stains. I have been using it for years.
Oh, madam, the regular detergents and bleach are used for washing clothes.
To disinfect your toilet properly, you need Harpic 10X. It is specially made for germs and stains remover. Harpic sticker formula settles on stains and gives 10 times better cleaning compared to regular detergent and bleach.
Wow! Now I'm convinced, Helen Paul.
Really?
Yeah.
Now that she's part of the mission, the next house is yours.
These days, people get their news and information from more media sources than ever before. Some of the news and information given are fake, unverified, doctored, and manufactured to create confusion, stir disaffection, and cause disunity. Before you believe or share any news, ask yourself, is this real? Is it from a credible source? Is it verified or verifiable? Fake news is dangerous. Whether you do it for fun or for political gains, real people can get hurt. Fake news, don't create it, don't spread it.
This is a public service announcement from NTA.
Liverpool are unstoppable at home, but will they carry that form on the road against the Seagulls of Brighton? This Saturday, it's Brighton versus Liverpool on the Premier League Live, showing on the NTA network from 1 p.m.
The Premier League Live is brought to you by Access Bank, by Jebu, Lipton Tea, and Close Up.
This is Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you live from the Nigerian Television Authority. We're discussing, COVID-19 vaccine and then access for Nigerians. Our conversation today centers on this, and we shall now take a prompt from Aisha Ubali as a backgrounder.
Since March, almost every news making headline on any media platform has something to do with coronavirus, popularly known as COVID-19. This is not exclusive to Nigeria alone, but globally. However, one sure way of combating the virus is through vaccination, which is a critical tool that will assist to bring the pandemic under control when combined with effective testing and prevention measures. Despite challenges mitigating the production of vaccine, which range from acceptability as a result of misinformation going around about the vaccine, the efficacy of the vaccine, researchers globally are working effortlessly to accelerate the development and manufacturing of a safe and effective vaccine for the pandemic. Some assurance from development partners is that countries that cannot afford the vaccine will be carried along. Africa, according to observers, need to take a bold step in the production of COVID-19 vaccine. The World Health Organization projects the distribution of safe and effective COVID-19 vaccine early to mid next year. What access do Nigeria have? Will the question of acceptability arise? What efforts is government making in local vaccine production? These and more will be answered shortly by our guest on Good Morning Nigeria.
Many thanks, Aisha Obale, for that backgrounder. With us in the studios now to begin discussing this subject matter, let's welcome Dr. Ngozi Rosemary Azudo. She's Director of Health Planning, Research and Statistics, and also focal person of the National Health Sector COVID-19 Pandemic Response Action Plan and Head Coordinating Secretariat of the Ministerial Expert Advisory Committee on COVID-19. Now, just all of those titles just tell you that she's from the Federal Ministry of Health. Dr. Azuto, pleasure to have you with us this morning.
Thank you, and good morning.
All right. Also here with us in the studios is Professor Oyewale Tomori, immediate past president of the Nigerian Academy of Science and a highly respected virologist, disease and prevention control expert. He's chairman of the Federal Ministry of Health Ministerial Committee on COVID-19 Response and also chairman of BioVaccines Nigeria Limited. Prof, pleasure to have you with us in the studios.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
And also part of this conversation this morning is Dr. Faisal Shuaib, Executive Director, National Primary Healthcare Development Agency and member, Presidential Task Force on COVID-19. He's also, that's right here.
Good morning, viewers.
You're welcome. All right, also have from Abuja studio is also Professor Abdulsalami Nasidi, former Director General, Nigeria Center for Disease Control. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
You're welcome. Right, also
have let's get started, gentlemen, on this issue and then see how far we can go in trying to see how accessible Nigerians would be to the COVID-19 vaccine that have just been, found. But before we do that, let's talk about one pertinent issue that is now raging. Talking about the second wave of COVID-19 before we get down to the issues. How, possible is this and how serious would that be? Let me start with Dr. Faisal.
Right, thank you very much. At this point in Nigeria and the Presidential Task Force specifically, what we're doing is looking at the data to see if there are any similarities in terms of the incidence of COVID-19 when you compare what's happening in Nigeria and what's happening in other countries, especially the US and Europe. As you're well aware, they're experiencing a second wave in terms of increase in the number of cases. Given what we have seen so far, we have not seen that so far, but then we're also mindful of the fact that we're going into a different season, a colder season, and we do recognize that the pandemic seems to increase when the temperature is lower, right? When this is why we're seeing in the temperate countries where temperatures are lower that the cases are more, and we're also witnessing that the severity is more. But we're not resting on our arse. We're also keeping a close watch on what the epidemiology is telling us. Clearly, the epidemiology of COVID-19 in Africa is different from what we're seeing in other parts of the world, right? But because we do not know so much about this new disease, it's a novel disease, we're also watching and letting the data, letting science tell us what we really need to do. So we are not, so to speak, complacent. Even if we're not seeing severe cases, we're not seeing as severe cases, and we're not seeing as many cases. We know that we have to keep our eyes peeled because anything can happen, and that's exactly what the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 is doing. And we're also making sure that we're plugged into all the conversations that are happening around access to COVID-19 vaccines. So irrespective of the severity, irrespective of the nature of the pandemic in Nigeria, we're making sure that once the vaccines are available, that Nigerians can have access to it.
All right, Dr. Shuaib, thanks. Again, as my colleague Nadabo said, before we get into the vaccine issue proper, let's still explore what the outlook is with regard to a probable second wave of the pandemic here in Nigeria. Professor Tomori, what, in your view, is the outlook? And Dr. Shuaib made a comment to say, look, it appears, and from what we can see from just mere observation of the numbers, that the coronavirus pandemic hasn't been so much of a disaster for the African continent. Do we know why this is so, and therefore how is that likely to affect a second wave, assuming there will be any, on the continent and for us, particularly in Nigeria?
Thank you very much. There have been quite a lot of speculations on why we're not seeing the same epidemiology as you have in Europe and the Americas. Part of one would be the population dynamics of the country. In most of the parts of Europe where you had these cases occurring, most of the people affected have been the elderly people. When you look at the demographics of Nigeria, you find that our pyramid is strong, very strong base, because we have younger people at the lower level as compared to overseas where they have more older people, at the higher level. And therefore, we're not seeing that kind of deaths that we are seeing with that one. Secondly, the issue, people have talked about the weather. In a way, is just like Faiza said, as you go into the cold season, you're more likely to see, because of the congregation of people together, a much better spread than you have when people are out in the streets. In many of our own African environment, we are actually more outdoor than indoors in the way we work. Most offices in Europe are air conditioned and all that, so that gives a better opportunity for spread. There's also the speculation that perhaps in the years gone by, with so much exposure to different agents, our immune system has been stimulated to the point that it's assisting. We also believe that there probably have been some related coronaviruses that have been existent in Africa, which were providing some kind of protection. And there are studies being done to ensure that we're looking into what we call archival serum from people collected before COVID came, checking those sera for possibility of antibodies to corona or related virus. This is a study that will answer that kind of question. But may I also say that in terms of testing, I don't think we're doing that well in Africa. Apart from South Africa, which is testing quite well, many of the African countries are not testing enough. Within Africa, for example, Nigeria is testing like about 1/50th of what South Africa is doing. And therefore, the more you test, of course, the more you find, and which is what is coming about this issue of second wave. I think we may be living on a false hope, because if you look at what is happening right now, how many states are reporting? You find some states to report 8 states out of 30-something having results coming out. Some states are no longer testing. The attitude is that the problem is no longer there. And so I don't think we actually reach the peak of even the first wave, because we're not testing enough. So it's difficult to say we're going to go to a second wave because we've not done the right wave, the first wave, properly.
Oh, thank you so much, Professor Tomori. Professor Abdul Salam in the city, let me get your perspective on this. Professor Tomori mentioned testing is one of the, reasons that have not really been brought forward per se in order to get us through fully to the end of the first wave. And we're talking about the second wave most likely. And some states are yet to really comply to that, or rather implement it, and people have that attitude of believing that maybe it's a myth or whatever, that is not really real for sure. And thirdly, when we look at our climate too, the temperate climate, the climate we have is a bit hot and of course not really good enough for the virus to survive, unlike in the Western world or Western hemisphere. Now all this put together seem to point to the fact that we may not have, as the Prof said, reached the peak of the first wave, talk less of the second wave. Do you buy that idea?
Absolutely. I think the Prof is right, and the fact that going by the data we have today and that we are getting daily or weekly, we can't categorically state which stage we are. because the data are not reliable. We cannot be used for any epidemiological forecast, and therefore we really need to double up. If not, we shall find ourselves in big trouble. Secondly, it is so unfortunate that the states are really contributing to this failure. For instance, if you take this in some African countries, we call ourselves the giants of Africa, and yet since the advent of this disease, we've not been able to even test up to 1 million people. The total tests in Nigeria so far is below 1 million, about 900 and something thousand. South Africa has tested 5 million, Egypt about 3 million, and so on and so forth. So something is just wrong. The attitude of some state governors is so unfortunate. There's absolute complacency, interference in purely scientific and epidemiological activities, harassment of the healthcare workers, lots and lots of jokes. And if you're not careful, this can really lead us into big trouble.
Well, Professor Nasidi, thanks a lot for your comment. Let's bring in now Dr. Ngozi Azodo, who is the Director in the Federal Ministry of Health. Again, from your perspective, what is the outlook? Should we be concerned? You listened to Dr. Shuaib talk about what is playing out, as we know, in the Americas and more particularly in the Northern Hemisphere. Professor Tomori also then adducing some reasons as to why Africa has not been, as it were, a death ground for victims of COVID-19. Still, what should we be concerned about potentially about a second wave?
Thank you very much. Let me say up front that we cannot rule out the possibility of a second wave. So it's something that we are mindful of and continue to prepare for.
Why?
Because nobody knows all the epidemiology of the COVID-19. It's a new coronavirus. And so because it's happening all around the world, we should also expect and anticipate and prepare of the possibility. That way we are not taking unawares. I think that's what preparedness is all about. And that's also what the Ministry of Health and its agencies are doing. Now there are so many suggestions and proposals on why we haven't had the kind of experience that is going on in the Northern Hemisphere. And research and studies are going on to confirm. But the fact is that there still remains that possibility, and so we can't rest on our oars. Well, from the health system point of view, there are so many things that could have been done in the past that were not done. So, but there's also a lot that is currently being done. So we must look at what has happened, what the ministry and all the other stakeholders have done in the last 6 to 9 months of the COVID response. Maybe that also accounts for some of the successes we are having. We also have come from a position of very poor infrastructure dispensation, especially in our public health laboratory system. And we started with about 3 to 4 laboratories, and now we are over 64. So we cannot really, compare ourselves in terms of coverage for testing with people who already had this infrastructure on ground. The attitude, of course, of the subnational government, the subnational government authorities also has compounded the matters. And so, what are we doing? We are looking at. We have be mindful of all of these challenges. The ministry has, articulated an action plan, which has taken into account all the existing plans. The incident action plan that is driven by the Nigerian Center for Disease Control, which has done a lot. I mean, the NCDC is the public health lead agency, and they have risen to this challenge, So that incident action plan, plus all other existing plans, and then looked at the issues around what infrastructure deficit do we have? How can we plug it into this? Even the NPACDA, under the leadership of Dr. Feza, also came up with, proposals. All of that were articulated into the action plan. And so we have a flexible plan, which is built on what is in existence, which is also looking at the gaps that had existed, and then ensuring that we have continuity of services. Because in the middle of the pandemic, people still gave birth, children needed to take immunization and all of that. So in focusing all our energy on the pandemic, there was a risk, to take our eyes on all the other services, which would have compounded the issues we had in our health system.
But what you have said in terms of policy, in terms of planning, in terms of try to get the right structures and infrastructure, the people are key. And here we're talking about the likelihood of a second wave. I haven't been to many Nigerian cities in recent months, but the few Nigerian cities I've been to, including Abuja, where we are broadcasting from, you go out there and the view, the popular view, by the way, is that, as I say, Corona don't go. So all the precautions that you preached, all the precautions that people were supposed to observe, social distancing, wearing of a face mask, washing your hands and all that, none of it is being respected. It's only a few exclusive places you go to, they say, wear a mask. When you come out of that place, some of them, as soon as they're leaving the place, they are taking off their mask. So how do we deal with this? I mean, assuming we get a second wave.
Well, that is clearly a big challenge. And so what we are doing is to ramp up the public health education, ramp up. And of course, there must be increased political leadership engagement. If we have everybody who has a political position engaged with the process, actually supporting the Ministry of Health and all the other stakeholders, and ensuring that we take and do that which we are supposed to do, observe all the non-pharmaceutical interventions, that will help. We also should have targeted, interventions of, okay, we are mobilizing for testing, and we also mobilize, just engage with the system. When we have a situation where the leaders of thought also do not comply, it creates the impression that actually this is not, there's no longer a problem. So public education and risk communication remains key in the management of this pandemic, and we cannot.
But we haven't seen that.
We haven't seen that really. But Dr. Faisal, when you look at this statistics, especially put forward by Professor Tamori there, South Africa tested about 5 million people, then Egypt 3 million, and we're yet to even test 1 million. And then looking at what Dr. Ngozi is saying here, the perception of the public generally about this whole issue. Looking also at our structures, our facilities, the COVID-19 has exposed some of our inadequacies in the health system, and of course brought forth the fact that we need to do much more in the health sector. And coupled to also the seeming nonchalance in court of subnational governments, and above all, what Kinsley is talking about, the attitude of Nigerians about this whole protocol issue and even the disease itself. Do you see us really rounding up on the first wave and even jumping into the second wave? Because Ngozi is saying that for sure it's inevitable, the second wave?
Not inevitable.
Well, not that a second wave is inevitable. I think one thing that we must be very clear about as Nigerians and as Africans is that we cannot continue playing the copycat, right? What is very clear, and I believe Professor Tomori, made a comment around that, is the epidemiology of COVID-19 in Africa, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, those areas that are a little bit dry and humid, is a little bit different, right? So, Africa accounts for about, 17% of the global population. But the numbers of cases that we've seen is somewhere between, 4 to 5%. Granted that we're not seeing, we don't have, testing like other parts of the world. And then we're seeing mortality rates of around 3%, right? Thereabout. What we're seeing in the Northern Hemisphere, in America, in Europe, is the fact that their ICUs, their hospitals are overflown with cases, right? We're not seeing that in Africa. We're not seeing that in Nigeria. So we need to really manage COVID-19 outbreak in the perspective of our context, right? And the context requires that we do whatever it takes for us to increase testing. It is only by testing that we know the true nature of the outbreak, right? Who are the people that are getting affected? Are they dying? Where are they? What's happening about this outbreak? Having said that, knowing that Africa and Nigeria is an outlier when it comes to this outbreak, then we need to now realize what has this outbreak shown. It has shown very clearly, just like the chairman of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 said, it has exposed very clearly the weak infrastructure, especially at the primary and secondary healthcare level. All across the land, when you go to villages, when you go to even cities, you find that the primary healthcare centers are barely staffed enough to even take care of basic conditions such as malaria, pneumonia, and so many on the 5 conditions. This is why Nigeria continues to rank among the highest in terms of maternal mortality, under 5 mortality, right? So we have to use this crisis as an opportunity to not only increase knowledge about infection prevention and control for all diseases, not just COVID-19, but also how do we strengthen our health system. Maybe we got lucky with COVID-19, right? That we're not seeing, the doomsday scenario that was expected in Africa. But can we use this as a lesson to now prepare for potentially another pandemic, another outbreak? We saw what happened with Ebola. We came together as a country, eradicated Ebola. Private sector was very crucial, very important in helping us as a government. The private sector is also involved right now, okay? But can we have a situation where we don't have to wait for the next pandemic, the next outbreak, before we prepare, before we use the private sector to strengthen our health system? After Ebola, pretty much the private sector said, thank you, we're done, out the door. With COVID, they're very, very involved. They're bringing in resources like we've never seen before. How do we use this? How would we bring them around the table and have a conversation where we can now strengthen our health system in a sustainable manner? How can we use not just their funding, but they also have management skills. They have frontline technology that they bring into their private businesses. How can we bring them round the table and make sure that we no longer have a health system?
Dr. Swai, you have the experience with that. You have the experience with the elimination of the white polio virus, the private sector participation that was largely instrumental to the success that Nigeria recorded. But you made a point. I'm going to skip Professor Tomori in the meantime and then bring in Professor Nasidi because you said, look, we're probably lucky that COVID-19 hasn't become the doomsday nightmare that we all feared. But you also say that, okay, probably we're lucky. But getting rid of Ebola wasn't just mere luck. Professor Nasidi at the time was Director General of NCDC, that's Nigeria Center for Disease Control. That's why I want to bring him again. Professor Nasidi, you listened to what Dr. Faisal was saying with regard to the need for us to prepare, use the experience that we are having now to prepare against any future outbreak, not just waiting for a second wave of coronavirus. Were there lessons that we learned from dealing with Ebola that have been useful this time and that we need, of course, to build on in terms of our preparedness against any future pandemic?
Thank you. Thank you, Kisley. And I think I listened very carefully to what Dr. Faisal said. And it's unfortunate that, the experience learned, from Ebola was not brought to bear fully in our fight against this COVID-19. And that's the story of Nigeria, even though we use that to fight polio. One of the most important, experience that we learned from the fight against Ebola, and I'm happy I have this opportunity to mention it, is the role of the leadership of the health sector, leadership of the country. People don't like to talk about the past leaders the way they should, but I have to say, without the role of the former Minister of Health, Christian Chukwu, and the former President of Nigeria, President Goodluck Jonathan, believe me, we wouldn't have been able to achieve the so-called success we achieved in fighting the Ebola. Speed was so important. You know, when we diagnosed the case, you know, in Lagos, that were imported into Lagos from Liberia, there was, you know, very important, there were very important issues that we need to handle immediately. And that is how do we, you know, reduce our response time to respond effectively and immediately. And the first thing we did is, after, you know, we use all the techniques we had in Nigeria to identify and confirm that, yes, that guy had Ebola, we had to inform the Minister of Health immediately, which we did. And the minister, you know, immediately rolled out the rules and regulations. Say, listen, I can't announce that Ebola has entered Nigeria until we get confirmation from WHO laboratory. But nevertheless, I will tell the president. And he told the president of Nigeria, he said, okay, you wait, I will call you back. He called me back after some time, say, are you sure what you will have is Ebola? I said, yes. He said, I hold you responsible. If it is not, I said, you can hold me responsible. He told the president of Nigeria, and the president of Nigeria reacted and said, listen, I don't need to wait for WHO to take measures to fight this Ebola. I will have to rely on our own Nigerian scientists. I think that's a great achievement. That's a huge lesson learned. The leaders should respond adequately. This current COVID-19, we can say at the federal level, this also came very well. We can't blame, you know, the Minister of Health. We can't blame the PTF. They are doing very well. Neither can we blame the President, who is also personally involved. But now, cascading down is what we are very afraid of. Leadership at the state levels, you know, even though the governor forum, they are trying and all this and so on and so forth. But they know some of their individual governors messed us up. They didn't do well. They, you know, allowed this thing to, you know, get out of hand. And the so-called, how many, 70 laboratories we have, you know, has not added value to what we need to have. That is, if we had 2 laboratories before and now we have 70 laboratories, why are we not testing more? It's because the laboratories are not getting samples. And they're not getting samples because of, you know, so many things that we just can't list here. The second very important example we got from the Ebola experience is the, you know, people keep talking about the high level discipline, but believe me, without the heroic response of the healthcare workers, we will have been nowhere. We have to be proud that we Nigerians have enough experts on ground. We had enough experts on ground in all aspects of this disease response, you know, to deal with this. Professor Tomori, despite his age, he was there on ground in Lagos. We're all on ground, and so on and so forth. So Professor Milabu, these are guys that risked their lives for almost 1 week. Only myself and Milabu, and then some few medical listeners were at the center where this disease was located. But nevertheless, what is very impressive is that the youth, the Nigerian youth coming from the Nigerian field epidemiological and laboratory training programs, our universities, our medical hospitals that came, they fought as if they are just in a war front to fight for their country. So that's very impressive. Then the last point is one thing that we have to accept that played a key role in fighting the Ebola is the immediate response by the
Well, it seems we have a problem with the connection there with Professor Nasidi. But let's keep going on this issue and then maybe round it up in some few minutes to come before we get down to the real topic. Dr. Ngozi, I didn't mean you said it was...
Sorry, Dodabo, yeah. You see, Professor Tobore, I skipped him earlier. If you don't mind, I say he's been itching to say something. Professor Tobore, before we come back to Ngozi, if you don't mind.
Okay, right on.
Yes, Prof. Yes, there are a number of issues on the table. Let's have your take on them.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think one of the things I wanted to say was that what we call success today is a failure of the past. That Nigeria is now building 90 laboratories and calling that success is because these laboratories should have been there years ago. Mm-hmm. So when you now say that what should have been there, you're now making it, you're now passing school cert after you should have graduated, and you're calling that success. That's the problem we have in this country. I think we need to begin to look at that. What did we do with our past? Were we not taking care of our disease problem before in this country? Were we not, when the epidemics of yellow fever and all those things came in this country in the 80s and the 90s, it was done by Nigerians. The laboratory that did the WHO confirmation, with the confirmation for yellow fever, was the WHO accredited laboratory between 1963 up to 1993. What happened to us? These are some of the things we should begin to examine. And so what we call success, it's like making ammunition at the war front. You're pouring icing on a rotten cake, and you're saying you're making success. I think we need to tell each other the truth about what is going on. You mentioned something about public awareness. Until you reduce that public awareness to that person individually, then people are not going to take it seriously. You saw me when I came in here, that I refused to remove my face mask, because this is a public place. My life is the first thing consideration until we let our people know that they are the important people in this business. Make their life important. All the public awareness we're doing will go off the air until you make it mean that I'm the one that will suffer. The government is not going to die of COVID. I'm the one that will get COVID. Therefore, I'm the most important person. Let's get that message down to our people.
Oh, that's great, really. That's a very strong one, really, for all Nigerians to really listen and take to, and then, use in order to save lives and save themselves. I was about to ask you a question about, how we see this analysis, talking about how we were able to go through Ebola. But looking at what we have at the moment, looking at the response and the energy and the resources put into fighting COVID within and outside, we should think that there's no doubt there is much more than Ebola, and then the energy is even stronger than that on Ebola, but the intensity of the disease is not near what COVID is. To the fact that it had no cure at the moment, so that was the scare, the big scare. Now, Professor Tamori mentioned very important thing, that's public awareness. I want you to react to that and respond to this. How do we get the ordinary Nigerian really to get himself in that position to say, yes, I am the one. I need to be tested because I need to stay alive. Let me take responsibility. The PTF has been doing that, but it didn't go much further. It just stopped somewhere.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, the public awareness is key, and what we must do is to continue to review the strategies, continue to use our public personalities, continue to insist and enforce our laws. When you come to the ministry, once I enter the lift, everybody who is not wearing face mask leaves. And that is because one insists, and my staff will come and say, oh, madam, they said you are making trouble. I said, no, this is the Federal Ministry of Health. So we must come to a point where in our own space, like Prof had said, we must insist on doing the right thing. We must enforce it, and we must ensure that people who are supposed to enforce the implementation of the non-pharmaceutical initiatives, interventions are also supported to enforce that. Then we must also use, public awareness and public education is something that you can't stop doing. Then we must also find a way to desegregate it downwards. Like we used to do when we were in primary school, we had songs that you would sing and, wash your hands and all of that. And I'm sure that all of us here reflexly, do those things now, 30 years, 40 years after we've left primary school. So we also must involve that level of our systems. And that is where the role of the primary health care agency comes in very, very strongly. We must involve our communities. We must design and involve all the relevant sectors. Okay. We must look at the NYC. What can we do with them? We just can't stop talking about them. We just can't stop talking about these things. The only way to educate somebody is to educate the person. And we have the infrastructure, we have the human capacity, so we must step out and begin to do that. Now, at the subnational level, it has been a bit of a challenge, because we don't have the kind of political support, in some quarters that we require. And so the engagement of political leadership remains important. We have had situations where NCDC staff went to some states and they were threatened with arrest and stuff like that, and people are not allowed to test. Even people who want to test are not allowed to test. So those kinds of things should not be allowed. There must be a way to engage this political leadership to ensure that that does not happen. Now, the danger in allowing that to happen is that gradually it percolates through the system. People feel, oh, somebody did it in my village and they got away with it. People didn't die. We don't know that people didn't die. There's no indication that people did not die. But somebody has done it and gotten away with it. And so gradually we begin to feel that we can get away with it. And then that undermines all the effort that has been made. And like I said before, while we know that the COVID situation has not been as terrible as it's been in the Northern Hemisphere, we can't rest on our oars.
Okay.
We will continue to anticipate and a second wave and prepare for it and hope that it doesn't come.
I would want Dr. Faisal to respond to this. Get it very much clear. At the beginning, the PTF was just community testing, and then there was, that heightened public enlightenment about people to really get to know this so much. What really went wrong, and what really didn't we do rightly to sustain that tempo and then get the ordinary Nigerian accept the fact that this thing is real and let's take responsibility?
At the beginning of the pandemic, one of the interventions that the Federal Ministry of Health and the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency did was to develop a guideline because we realized quite early in the outbreak that there was community transmission. So ahead of widespread community transmission, we developed a guideline for primary healthcare interventions, and that involves not just the primary healthcare facility, but also community as well. Beyond the guideline that we developed, we went ahead and trained over 220 primary healthcare workers and community-based health workers. As a result of that guideline that we developed, a lot of African countries actually reached out to the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency to lay hands on that guideline that clearly describes what primary healthcare workers are supposed to do and what people are supposed to do at the community level. And in a number of states at the beginning of the outbreak, people actually went from house to house to educate community members about how they can protect themselves from COVID-19, how they can also protect their loved ones. But beyond that, also at the primary healthcare level, after an initial challenge with accessing clients, primary healthcare workers became even more confident that they knew how to protect themselves from potential COVID-19 cases. They were provided with personal protective equipment, and that gave them more confidence that they'll be able to do their work. I believe part of what has happened in the course of the pandemic is multiple in terms of what people perceive. So in some states, you had leaders that refused to acknowledge the existence of the COVID-19 outbreak in their states. And you know that when you go to the state, the number one citizen is the governor. A lot of people take their bearing. They take their education from what types of symbolism the governor, really puts out there. That, in a number of places, retarded the kind of progress that people saw. And we're happy that we've begun to turn the corner in terms of that engagement between the national and the subnational level. Hopefully, we'll be able to improve on that. However, we should also be mindful of the fact that social media has also played a role in that sense of invulnerability, where people who are in the isolation centers, right, that are confirmed positive, are dancing and playing music and feel like, they say, I'm positive, I'm positive to COVID-19, but see how strong and healthy I am. Now, that is a little bit actually drastically different from when, for example, you have Ebola No way you're going to be dancing if you have Ebola, if you're confirmed with that kind of diagnosis, right? So people began to feel like, I can actually survive
and the part of the
COVID-19.
messaging was that COVID-19 is not necessarily a death sentence.
Right. However, the message that is coming out from the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, the Federal Ministry of Health, and all of the stakeholders, right, is that we must realize that by wearing face masks, by practicing social distancing, you're not only protecting yourself, but you're also protecting your loved ones, right? And this is why, even with the nonchalant attitude that we're seeing in a lot of states, and people now don't wear face masks, we're still, as an agency, communicating and engaging with our traditional leaders, our religious leaders, to also bring into proper perspective what an outbreak means in terms of religious terms, in terms of our community, and that moral role that we have to play. Because we know that if we continue to be careless in terms of protecting our loved ones from COVID-19, then those people that we love so dearly, our parents, our grandparents, who are most vulnerable, are the ones who are less likely to survive the disease if they actually contract it. So it is not just about the young people who feel strong, but it's also that moral responsibility, that social capital that we must imbibe in all of our society. That is not about you as an individual, but in protecting yourself, protecting your family, you also protect the society.
The community. All right, thanks a lot, Dr. Faisal. Now, Dr. Azodo and the other gentlemen, the news out there is that a number of candidate vaccines have recorded varying degrees of success. If you were to grade them as students, this would be A scores. News out of Pfizer, news out of Astra, and of course the Russians and the Chinese. So, Professor Tomori, what does this mean for humanity, and in particular, what does it mean for Nigeria?
Thank you very much. I think it's good news that we're finding vaccines in different places. And I think the way vaccine development has come up, thanks to COVID and to Ebola, which has actually fastened the activities. So it's good news, but then that also raises a few important things. Which vaccine do we use? Which one do we have access to? And then one other question that still not been answered, what is the duration of immunity? Is it going to last for long? Or is it going to be like if a flu, for example, we're going to be getting the shot every year? These are questions that are still being on the board, which are on the table, which are not yet, we have no answers to.
Professor Nasidi, your thoughts on the vaccine stories around the world?
I think that is the major issue, particularly for Africa and Nigeria. We are very happy the world is celebrating the speed with which the vaccines were developed, manufactured, and almost been deployed. But the major issue that came to bear and glared in our faces is, how do we really get these vaccines into the human beings? So the logistics of getting it from the fridge, the freezers, right into the arm of the human being that needs to be protected, was now looked at. And in some cases of these vaccines, it might be even more expensive. The cost to vaccinate an individual might be more expensive than the cost of the vaccine. Secondly, the storage, unfortunately, of the 4 vaccines, they are no longer candidate vaccines, they are vaccines that are already, in the public business, very worrying. Pfizer, the one that, was moved out immediately, needs between 60 to 90 degrees centigrade. Our, primary healthcare childhood immunization vaccines require mostly between 2 to 8 degrees.
Unfortunately, there is a little disruption there. We'll get over it and we'll get back to Professor Nasidi. Dr. Ngozi, let's look at this vaccine issue and then juxtapose it with what you have in this country. It was initially a sort of a death sentence for COVID for people, and now vaccines come, people are now beginning to heave a sigh of relief. But even when it was more or less like the sentence, which was really allayed, people were very nonchalant about the whole situation. And now with the vaccine in place, don't you think this one could aggravate or rather heighten that feeling about among people that now there's medicine? What else?
Thank you very much. Very important point you've raised. First, from a medical and epidemiologic point of view, vaccines are good news for us in the fight against COVID. Having said that, I don't know, at my age, of any vaccine that has faced so much campaign against it like the COVID-19 vaccine. There has been all kinds of campaigns, allusions around why a vaccine, why people want to produce it, why people should not take it, and all that. So the challenge is not just what Professor Nasidi has said or what Faisal will say, but the challenge is also in getting people to accept to take the vaccine. So while we are looking at the issues around actual purchase of the vaccines, the provisions, the resources, and then the logistics nightmare that it looks like it's going to be, there's also the issue around resistance, to uptake. We are famously known for resisting vaccines. Even polio, that was just a drop in your mouth, we resisted it. And now this vaccine has come in the middle of so much campaign, a lot of it around faith, which really, it's very difficult to change people's mind around that. So we are focusing on looking at how can we address the issues of the pricing, how can we address the issues of the logistics, and then the issues of generating uptake, encouraging people like me and you, who are supposedly very obeying and civilized and not knowing, to even take the vaccines, let alone our own relations who are not so obeying. So that is a big challenge. The Minister of Health didn't rest on his oars, so he's put together a committee, that will look at everything around the vaccines, the challenges, the procurement, the resources, and, also the possibility of having our own local options of the vaccines. But in the interim, of course, we have to buy. And Dr. Faisal is working on that. I'm sure he will speak to that. We have to buy, we have to, take care of the logistics, and then we have to address the issues. There are also a few candidate vaccines still online, which are coming from the Asian countries, which do not have such temperature requirements, but they are still just candidate vaccines. We do hope that, while we are at this, that those vaccines will become available, for public use, medically certified and available for public use. So yes, vaccine is good news, but there are logistic challenges, there are challenges around the uptake, and we are addressing that. But nobody's wishing it away at all.
Okay. Dr. Faisal, this is your tough. So, what are the issues around the COVID-19 vaccine that we should be concerned about, and therefore we should begin to plan our response to or against?
Right, so as a country, we are involved in multiple conversations around how we can get vaccines for Nigerians, particularly Nigerians who are deemed to be the most vulnerable. So we're looking at Nigerians who are in the front line of the COVID-19 outbreak response, so our health workers. Then another category will be those Nigerians that are deemed to be most vulnerable, so those who have comorbidities, that is to say those that have other diseases such as diabetes, hypertension, asthma, other diseases that potentially could worsen the outcome of a COVID-19 disease. And then, of course, those who are elderly. These are the people that we've seen tend to fare worse when it comes to COVID-19. So one of the groundbreaking collaborations globally that we've seen as a result of COVID-19 was the setup of what we call the ACT, the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator. right? So the global community, global leaders came together and said, what do we do about this pandemic, especially when it comes to issues around testing, treatment, and vaccines. So with specific reference to vaccines, a facility known as COVAX, COVID-19 vaccine, was set up, right, to make sure that all countries, irrespective of their financial status, will have fair and equitable access to the vaccines once they become available. And right now, we know that a lot of talk is going on around the two vaccines, one from Pfizer, the other one from Moderna, which are messenger RNA vaccines. There are a bunch of other candidate vaccines that are in the pipeline that are more protein-based. So the first two tend to require very extreme temperatures like below 80 degrees, minus 80 degrees. These are temperatures where you need to keep the vaccines in freezers that can keep the vaccines in that kind of temperature to make sure that they remain potent. Now, we don't have those, right? That is why, as a country, we're looking very, very carefully. We're not rushing in to say, okay, come on, let's have the vaccines. No vaccine will be accepted in Nigeria until it satisfies all of the requirements, global requirements in terms of safety, and the requirements of NAFDAC. So NAFDAC is also working with the NCDC, with the Federal Ministry of Health, to make sure that before any vaccine comes to Nigeria, NPHCD provides leadership when it comes to introduction of new vaccines. One thing that is uppermost in our minds is that unless we are sure and satisfied that the vaccines are safe and efficacious, even if the whole world is taking it, we will not bring it to Nigeria.
All right. No vaccine will be accepted in Nigeria until it meets the global standard. That's the bottom line.
That's a deal breaker for us.
You have so much to talk about here because you didn't talk about the AstraZeneca and, of course, the Sputnik 5 from Russia. Professor Tamuri Tude is itching to say something, but you just got to give us some minutes. Let's take a break. We'll be back with more time for us to talk about these issues and the access of Nigerians to these vaccines. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria. We'll now take a break. Stay back for more on this program.
The counsel of our fathers.
I will urge and advise our younger generation to use talent and brain to sort out problems, not arms.
Nigerian youths, let's build our nation together.
My name is Nando Jamda Muhammad.
Stevita
Hussein Musa. Roduna Joel Chinji. Said Musa John. I'm a carpenter. I've been doing this for more than 8 years now.
Ina sai da plantain na kai kimamin shekara uku.
I've been selling my tomatoes for about 10 years now, and I do it for a better Nigeria.
And I do it for a better Nigeria.
Ina wannan sana'ar lemu ne domin Nigeria ta ci gaba.
Ina sa domin Nigeria ta kyau.
And you can see we are doing our small little work to make Nigeria great.
As you can see, I'm a technician and I'm doing it to help myself and to help my generation.
Ina zaune ne a plateau na business. Kuma ina yin wannan domin ci gaban ƙasar Najeriya.
For a better Nigeria.
This message is from the National Orientation Agency. Dialogue, empathy, love, and unity. These are vital components of nation building.
For all to be well, we appeal that we should refrain from volatile, provocative, inciting messages and language.
Let's build and not destroy.
Liverpool are unstoppable at home, but will they carry that form on the road against the Seagulls of Brighton? This Saturday, it's Brighton versus Liverpool on the Premier League Live, showing on the NTA network from 1 p.m.
The Premier League Live is brought to you by Access Bank, Bye Jebu, Lipton Tea, and Close Up.
All right, you're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria. We're live on NTA's network service. We still have all our guests with us, and some tweets have also come in. But let's still get our guests, well, of course, experts in the field, to comment still on the issue of the vaccine. Professor Tomori, earlier you ticked off some concerns about the vaccine. Now, will it be a yearly vaccine or will it be a single dose? As we were told, yellow fever in those days, 10 years, even though some experts are saying that it could be for a lifetime. But part of the challenge that one has been hearing and reading about has to do with ready availability. On account of the havoc that the coronavirus has wreaked on humanity, there's a great deal of nationalism now surrounding the acquisition of the vaccines, even before you have mass production. I mean, countries are already ordering tens, if not hundreds of millions of these vaccines. So, from your point of view, what do we need to worry about the production? Are we going to wait for the original manufacturers to produce the vaccines and send to us, or are we going to have in-country production by way of licensing and other issues? Because you can be certain that if citizens of other countries begin to get the jabs, then your own citizens will say, when are we going to have our jabs? Even though Dr. Azodo talks about likely resistance in some quarters.
Thank you very much. There are 1 or 2 points I thought I would like to make. Currently, we're setting up committees, one for Sputnik, one for Pfizer, the Vice President is doing another one, everybody. I think we should dissolve all these committees and have just one committee that takes all of the information about the different vaccines together so that we have a comprehensive view as distinct from what we're getting right now. That's the only way we can get the best.
Sorry, Prof, please just restate that. I think you're asking for policy streamlining.
Yes, I was saying that currently the Vice President is talking with Pfizer. Ministry of Health set up a committee to talk about Sputnik. There's another committee which is looking in general about other things. I'm saying dissolve all this committee, have one committee that looks at all of the truth about everything about the vaccines in a comprehensive manner. I mean, what my committee is doing and what the other doing things in silos is not going to help us. So we need to have one committee that's focused on pair both of them together before, according to what Pfizer said, but NAFDAC and others can then begin to look into that. That's the first one. You talk about production locally, how we're going to access. You know, I want to say one thing quickly so that which will align to that one. The environment that Nigeria created when I was growing up made me what I am today, and I'm very proud of that. But we lost that environment. There are still talented people in the diaspora, in this country, who are doing great things if we only create the environment for them to function. I never studied outside this country. Everything was done here. We should go back and create that environment for our people so that all these people we are talking about, we have become a consumer nation. It's not that we don't have people who can do it, but we have not created the environment for them to function. That's number one. We have the BioVaccine Nigeria Limited, which has been in operation we have been working on it in a tortuous journey to where we are. If we had really done what we need to have done, there's nothing which stops Nigeria from participating in producing locally portion, at least a stage of the vaccine in this country. But right now, we're not ready for that. Well, I'm not that worried, but I'm saying that we shouldn't lose this opportunity for the future, because what's going to happen is that after Ebola, it was COVID, we don't know what the next one. Nigeria should be ready for the next one, and by that, learn from this COVID experience and then move on, so that when the next one comes, we are at the forefront and creating the vaccines that our country needs.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Professor Tamori. Let's cross over to Abdul Salam Nasiri and then Professor that is, and look at the inside story of these vaccines and then how accessible they can be for Nigerians. Sputnik 5 is from Russia. AstraZeneca is from the UK, I believe, and Moderna that is, and Pfizer are from the US. Looking at their own what they seek to, provide, which is a cure for, or rather, prevention rather for COVID-19. The cost here plays a very important role. And number two, when we look at its arrival or their arrival per se, they've just come in most likely to be tested or rather be used in the next 30 days or so in the US. And then we look at how available they'll be in this part of the world. Do you see the possibility of us really, having access to these vaccines in the nearest future, vis-a-vis the cost implication of each vaccine and the doses required and the time for us to really have it?
Thank you. I think this is a very important question and might even be one of the most important questions for today's topic. First and foremost, it is dangerous for us as a nation to say we are waiting for the perfect vaccine. There is not something that should be done by a nation with large population like Nigeria. All countries that have large populations are particularly so active, searching for the vaccine and searching for how they will access this vaccine. And many have gone into what is called, the advanced purchase order. So countries like Philippines, Indonesia, India, all these countries that don't have the capacity to produce their own vaccines now. Even the US, UK, and now at times regional, Europe, and some regional countries in Asia are coming together to pre-order and get the vaccines. None of the 4 vaccines in the market are yet perfect. So the issue of saying we are waiting for a perfect vaccine, it must meet all conditions, is not possible. In fact, because the world knows that that is not possible to achieve immediately, they have now agreed to what they call emergency use authorization, which means they will give you accelerated approval to release that vaccine because it has passed phase 1, passed phase 2, passed phase 3. But it hasn't gotten WHO approval yet. It hasn't gotten FDA approval, full approval yet. So Nigeria should not joke. We should rise to the occasion. And then secondly, the issue of what I mentioned, logistics. The Pfizer vaccine, the Moderna vaccines are very good, perfect vaccines, but they might not be very useful, very easily accessible for Africa. Not because they are not good, because we can't really meet up with the logistic requirements to get them into our people. The best, the one that I believe we could immediately start trying to access are the Sputnik 5 vaccines and the Oxford University, Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. They have simpler logistics for deployment and they could actually serve Africa more. Then the last point I have on this issue is that we shouldn't also wait, just like Professor Tomori has mentioned, well, we should have at least been able to have the capacity to start manufacturing our own vaccines. But that's not the issue. We have already several centers in Nigeria that can be used immediately, like the Redeemers Laboratory in Ede in southwestern Nigeria. The OD Research Center in Bayelsa is a center that has been ignored. It has all the molecular biology facilities to work, working with the University of Africa, Tororua. Then, we have the Gadua Laboratory here that are already working, and this. Omilabu has a laboratory that is tracking this virus. We can, even if we are not yet manufacturing, we can, support our vaccine development, reagent development activities to move forward. So the access to these vaccines depends on the cost, on the ability to deploy it, and then at the same time on our capacity, to be able to, produce ours. Let me just end up by saying, we shouldn't remain fools in Africa. Don't ever think they will get you the vaccine through all those international distance and so on and so forth until their people have the vaccines. We shouldn't make the mistake we made during the H5N1 and the H1N1 pandemic flu. This is what Africa, the mistake we made. We were waiting for them to manufacture the vaccine and deploy to us. By the time 200 million doses, emergency vaccines were produced to be deployed to resource-limited countries of the world, Africa was the last to get only 3 million doses. And it came at the end of the pandemic. Our fear is that if you don't deploy, if you don't really take position now, and even Nigeria should, I believe, should immediately engage in this advance purchase, order activity. If not, the queue is too long. By the time we are waiting for the international one, if it doesn't come, then we have hotspots already in Africa. For instance, in the last 12 days, Sudan lost 7 doctors. South African cases are already increasing to 2,000 cases a day. So hotspots are already occurring in Africa. We shouldn't take things for granted. We don't have time. Windows of opportunity is closing. Thank you.
Professor Nasidi, thank you very much. Dr. Faisal, we're getting back to you now. In terms of access, the issues appear quite complicated, but also fairly straightforward if we decide to slice through it with the right policy approach. So what do we need to do? Professor Tomori says, look, there's no point having silos of committees trying to examine potential candidate vaccines for us to purchase. Professor Nasidi says, look, go ahead and make your purchases, but also have in-country production. What should we do?
So, first and foremost, I'm not very sure about, the multiple committees that Professor Tomori has mentioned. I'm not aware of any committee in the Vice President's office. What I am aware is that at the Federal Ministry of Health and the Presidential Task Force, there's only one committee that is the advisory committee that Professor Tomori is meant to chair. That committee will get information about the different vaccines. So we're not focused on any particular vaccines. We're not recommending any vaccines so far. We're looking at all of the available vaccines and the candidate vaccines and the ones that we feel will match our economy, what will match our population. That is what that advisory committee is meant to do. However, under that committee is a secretariat or an engine room that is represented by the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency. That National Primary Healthcare Development Agency has a subcommittee that is responsible for new vaccines introductions. So in the course of the last 10 years or so, we've introduced multiple vaccines. So we do have experience around how vaccines should be introduced. But of course, we are mindful that COVID-19 is likely to be a very different vaccine. And so there are new lessons that are going to be learned from the deployment of these vaccines. But the plan, and I think maybe Professor Tomori will get this information, the plan and the vision of the Honorable Minister is to have that advisory committee that he chairs, and then the engine room as a secretariat at NPHCDA, actually making sure that we come up with all of the plans around how the vaccines will be deployed. So we've already, developed a work plan for how the vaccine will be deployed.
How will the vaccines be acquired?
Right. So in terms of the acquisition of the vaccine, one of the pillars, of course, is making sure that experts such as Professor Tomori are sitting around the table and discussing which would be the best vaccine, given all of the vaccines that are going to be available. But we're also plugged into different conversations, right? Different global conversations that has looked at the experience that Professor Professor Nasidi has mentioned, that in the past, developing countries, middle income and low income countries were usually at the end of the queue to get these vaccines. With the COVID-19, the COVAX facility is designed to actually fix that problem. So almost every week, we are involved with other countries. There are 92 countries now that are in conversations around the different vaccines that are available. How do we make sure that there is fair and equitable access, whether you're a rich country or a poor country? And we already have advanced market commitment. So Nigeria has already signed up to that advanced market commitment that Professor Nasidi talked about. So we are now at the point where there's a deadline of December 7th for a contract to be signed between all these economies and the manufacturers through that COVAX facility that is led by Gavi, the World Health Organization, and CEPI, right? So we're engaged in all of these conversations, and it is done in a way that is very, very transparent. We know exactly what is going to come to the countries. So, for example, once we decide on the vaccines that we're going to get for Nigeria, the priority will be giving 20% of the population those vaccines. Who are the people in that 20%? The people who are most vulnerable. Those people that are in the front line, the health workers, the people who have comorbidities, the people who are above 60, those people who are likely to die and above. Yes. Those who are above 60. Those who are 60 and above. Yes, those who right. So those people who are likely to fare very poorly if they contract the disease. One thing I think that Professor Tomori has mentioned is the fact that there are a lot of questions about these vaccines, right? And Dr. Azodu has also mentioned the fact that this is the one single vaccine that already has resistance, even before it became available. At least with polio, the people said, oh, look, it causes that, it's going to cause that. There was already controversy many years after we started using it. But with COVID-19 vaccines, we've not even, had access to it. But, there's a lot of talk all over the place. This is why communication is very, very important. And we have already started that process of communicating to Nigerians that we will not shortchange them when it comes to their safety. And this is what we want to emphasize. That safety is more important than anything. And this is why even for so many vaccines that people say, oh, they're already given to their citizens, we're asking for the data. Let us see the safety data. Efficacy is very important, but we also want to see how safe these vaccines are before we bring them to Nigeria. Because if we do not solve that question, if we don't address that question in the minds of Nigerians, then of course Nigerians are going to resist. That is why on every call, in all of the global engagements that we're having, NAFDAC is part of it. The DG of NAFDAC is part of that conversation. So, in wrapping up, one thing I want to say is that there is no way Nigeria is going to be at the end of the queue.
Okay.
Nigeria, as a matter of fact, is built to be one of the co-chairs of one of the groups that will be taking pains to examine how there can be equitable supply of this vaccine, equitable access to these vaccines. Okay. So we're all plugged in. The Honorable Minister is on top of the situation. The chairman of the Presidential Task Force is up to date in terms of what we need to do. What Mr. Vice President is really saying, and as a leader, what Mr. Vice President has said is that all hands are on deck to make sure that we have access to these vaccines. It is only because of how important it is that he's also engaged in these conversations. We've had some meetings that involve the Vice President, right? People say, okay, this requires the highest level of discussions. And in some of the discussions, people are worried that, hey, usually it takes about 10 years for you to produce a vaccine. You've done this under 1 year. How can we be sure that these vaccines are safe? It may be safe short term. What about in the long term? And Mr. Vice President said, yes, people want to be aware of that. And when we talk about indemnity, right? People are talking about indemnity for this vaccine given the short period it took to produce them. Mr. Vice President is concerned that Nigerians want to access this vaccine, but also Nigerians are very, very careful about the safety considerations. And I think any leader will want to do that.
That is the point, safety considerations, of course.
Indemnity is a legal issue, but
yes.
So let's not get into that now.
Let's not get down into that really.
Yes.
Dr. Ngozi, let's see what justice you can make to this question I'm going to pose in the next 60 seconds, most likely. And that's the issue of looking at what Dr. Faisal said, and then the mad rush in quotes that is by high-income countries and middle-income countries for this vaccine, which indicates or points to the fact that we here, which are in the list of the low-income countries or less developed countries, may take some time before we really get there. But I remember the minister, the Minister of Health, once said that with the assurance from Pfizer, we'll be able to be at least among those to be prioritized in Africa. How fruitful is that, or how true is that statement?
That is very true. The Honorable Minister of Health has, in response to the advice of the Expert Advisory Committee, had approved the merging of all COVID vaccine committees under him, with MPACD as the secretary of the committee. The minister will inaugurate the committee either tomorrow or Monday, depending on how his schedule is. So, and that committee is a multi-sectoral committee with Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Finance, the private sector, CBN, Pfizer, BioVaccine. The idea is to ensure that, one, we have access to vaccine. We're not the last on the queue. We don't have multiple efforts going on, and that we also have ability, we are pursuing our own local ability to manufacture vaccines, and that we are, meeting all the international requirements while responding to local needs. And that's very, very important. And that committee is very multi-sectoral and responding to all the issues, including the issue of ensuring we break down the resistance, to possible purchase of vaccines. In addition, the PTF is also documenting the experiences of PTF. I work on that committee in the subcommittee of the PTF, which is documenting the work of the PTF and then how to mainstream their experiences. Part of what they're also doing is to return the functions of the different sectors to them and maintain a political coordination. That's part of strengthening the system. Now, what that is responding to is the issue raised by Prof about having our local structures and this system built. COVID, more than anything, has exposed not just the weakness of the system, but the need for us to build our local system. We've started making face masks and all of that, things that we ordinarily took for granted. We made them locally.
And part of that local response, as we have in a number of our tweets here, which of course we are pressed for time to take now, the tweets, some of them are asking, why doesn't Nigeria also get into the discovery of a vaccine? I mean, we are citing Sputnik 5, it's named after a Russian rocket of several decades ago. The Americans, Pfizer, and then University of Oxford. They're saying, look, where are our researchers to also help us develop a vaccine and other points? We believe that these are issues that will be taken on going forward, production, access and cost and pricing and transportation and all that. Suleiman Babagana, we thank you. Allah Al-Fasih, Festus Akumboyewa, Mutana Farouk, Chris Simeon, Dele Jack Solomon, Ajani, Olaoluwa, Mike Ayankwo. We'd like to thank you for your tweets. That's, of course, on the note of which we're going to also thank our guests who've been with us this morning, Dr. Ngozi Azodo, who is a director in the Federal Ministry of Health. Thank you for being part of our conversation this morning.
Thank you very much.
We also would like to appreciate Dr. Faisal Shuaib, Executive Director of the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency and member, Presidential Task Force on COVID-19. Dr. Faisal,
thank you for having me.
Pleasure having you. Professor Oyewale Tomori, ABD Past President, Nigerian Academy of Science, and of course, a renowned professor of virology, disease prevention and control. We appreciate your being with us this morning.
Thank you very much, sir.
A deep thanks also to Professor Abdulsalami Nasidi, former Director General, Nigeria Center for Disease Control, and also a member of, I think, Vice Chair of the FCT COVID-19 Response Team and Provost College of Medicine, University of Africa. Professor Nasidi, always a delight having you on Good Morning Nigeria. So, that does it for us today on the program. We thank you for being with us. We are back tomorrow, same time as always, 7 in the morning. Until then, take personal responsibility. Wear a mask, stay safe. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Yusuf Mirabus. Thank you so much for being part of this program this morning. See you tomorrow.